Coach Norman, we gotta lead into this with, and correct me if I'm wrong. You are a certified strength and conditioning specialist with the CSCS. You are a certified athletic trainer. And am I correct in saying you're also a physiotherapist?
Correct.
Okay, so which one of those hats came first?
Um, oh, so I started out in undergrad at Washington State and did my kinesiology. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
he's
hear
at
you
Washington.
there.
Yeah.
Yep. So I did my kinesiology there in athletic training, and then realized, like, I was like, wow, this athletic training thing, it's kind of hard to make it big, make money, kind of that overwork, underpaid kind of scenario that happens in athletic training. So to keep my options open, I was like, I'm going to hop in and also get a biology degree. And so I got a biology degree at the same time. And then so I was more athletic training. And then after the fact, I sat for my CSCS.
Okay.
Growing up as an athlete, and my
Mm-hmm.
sport was alpine ski racing, and I'm originally from Canada. And so, like, that's what got me down to the States. I was like, wow, I can ski and still go to college. Like, that's awesome. I'm there. And so that's what got me down there. Then, it was just a learning thing. Like everything, you start in one area, and then you realize, like, wow, there's some shit I need to learn over here. And then you go that way. And having a biology degree kept my options open for like med school or PT school or whatever it was. And then when I graduated, I worked with another buddy of mine, Kirk Bradshaw. We had a training business in Seattle, and we ran speed and development camps for kids, and we helped try and improve revenue at clubs, at training clubs around the city. And so I ended up sitting for my CSCS, got that. And so that's how I kind of got in the strength and conditioning side, is
Mm-hmm.
just from my athletic background, and then the fact that at the end of the day, I want to get people moving. And so I did that for a few years, ended up going back to PT school. This is where the wah wah wah, depending on what side of the fence you're on, was at
Right.
University of Washington. So
Mm-hmm.
I flipped the script there, got my PT degree. And then once I got out of PT school, I'm like, Jesus, I just spent 2 years figuring this out. Like, now I should probably see some patients and get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then ended up having a PT clinic in Seattle, on Mercer Island Olympic Physical Therapy, part of a group there. Did all my manual certifications, and then from there ended up going to what was Athletes Performance, now Exos, back in the OG days,
Yeah.
when there was maybe about 20 of us. And that was in 2002, 2003. And then kind of the rest is history. So I've kind of run the gamut.
Mm-hmm.
And as I went through the PT thing, it was always like the manipulation was good, but it was like, okay, that takes 2 seconds. And now, like, we need to get moving, we need to get going. And, my days at AP really helped kind of broaden the piece of what it takes to get somebody, from a rehab perspective. And then, then you're at a rehab perspective, like, okay, now how do we prevent this stuff from happening? And kind of reverse engineering it. And that's what got me into the strength and conditioning more so, and then getting into these kind of fitness, head of performance, because it's like that book Range. It's kind of the jack of all trades, master of none.
Mm-hmm.
And someone once said to me, he goes, that's broad range competency,
Mm-hmm.
and that has value. I was like,
Oh,
okay, I like this
Okay.
guy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He's my new agent.
Yeah.
most definitely. I mean, our career path too, the way it's kind of been driven, the way of the old school strength conditioning coach that simply, deals in weights has kind of, I mean, it still exists on actually in some settings. It's kind of amazing to me, but there's always been such a gap between, especially when it's kind of a return to play protocol.
Mm-hmm.
There's a gap where I've seen people not really prepared to come back into a weight room setting with everyone else. And I just think it's invaluable to have the skill set to bridge that gap from a communication standpoint, whether it be with the surgeon or the PT or the athletic trainers, whoever you're speaking with. but then craft something for that individual to actually get back to a return to play, because there's still such a huge gap in a lot of settings in this industry where someone's cleared, but they're not stepping back into an environment that prepared for the environment that they left, typically when they get that injury, from what I've seen. So no, I think you're coming the direction that you did in that sequence. If I knew what I knew now, like that's the ultimate way to do it. That really, because I mean the foundation is built in the correct order, as opposed to, I felt like I had to do the exact opposite going backwards in my career.
Yeah, I think it just, it's always the grass is greener on the other side, because like as a more of a medically trained person first, then into the more strength and conditioning stuff. I'm like, God, I wish I had more like in the weight room football experience and those kind of things.
Sure.
And versus the medical side. And I think another point you bring up, and it's just the nature of the beast, right? Like, and it's an evolution, and it's learning, is just a lot of PTs. Like when I went through PT school, it was like, okay, we're rehabbing somebody 3 sets of 15, and I'm like, where's this coming from? Why is everyone 3 sets of 15?
1923 illegal magazines. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I'm like, hey, it's all exercise prescription, whether you're rehabbing somebody or getting somebody stronger. It's just where on the spectrum are they? And like, so they might be really weak in some aspects, really strong in others, and vice versa. And so how do you kind of start bridging that gap? And you need one with the other. I think like it's almost like, I know there's so much content about each, that's why they're separate industries, but at the same time it's all the same thing. It's one complex human system, and you got to appreciate the greater good, otherwise you lose the forest through the trees.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Do you, when you're looking at your approach, so you, after AP, that was what, 2003 you mentioned?
2003 to 2006. Yep.
Okay.
And then we weren't, we didn't like living in Phoenix. I'm a kind of a mountain kid, grew up in the mountains. And my wife was like, hey, we need to get out of the city. And so
Camelback wasn't enough,
Lake Tahoe, California.
No.
What's that?
Camelback wasn't enough. The Death Mountain.
Totally. Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah. You run that thing so many times, and you're like, okay, I'm ready for something a little bigger. And so yeah, we ended up moving up to Lake Tahoe, California, in a little town called Truckee. And then I worked for the local hospital here as a PT, and getting sports. It's kind of a fun fact that for Winter Olympians, the area that I live in is kind of one of the highest per capita for Winter Olympians in the country. And so it's this huge kind of outdoor mecca area, and so lived here, consulted with AP doing their endurance programs, and because at the time I was into marathon running and triathlons and things like that. And then ended up kind of right in the wave of when I was transitioning. We got a call from T-Mobile Pro Cycling, and so they were looking for somebody to help with their strength and conditioning and recovery. And so I took that contract. Kind of Mark said, hey, Darcy, if you want to take this on, that was when the drugs were kind of rampant in cycling, and so if you want to take this on, we're not gonna touch it. And so being an independent kind of guy at the time, I was like, yeah, this is great. So then I did that for 5 years, and it was the kind of the end years of T-Mobile when all the drug stuff happened, into Team High Road, which became one of the winningest cycling teams. But we didn't win any grand tours, because it was pretty hard to get those done if you weren't doing it at the time. And so we'd win a lot of day stage races, but took a lot of the recovery methods, strength and conditioning methods, and applied it to cycling. And it was a really good time. Learned a ton on more of the metabolic training and power training, and as it relates to metabolics. And then from there, during that same time, Mark and Exos had the contract for the German national team. That started in 2004 when Jürgen Klinsmann was the head coach. or became the head coach. Mark and Jurgen had a relationship, liked what they were doing at Exos, and then took that model to the Germans in 2004 through the 2006 World Cup. And then Jurgen stepped away, wanted to get into coaching more on a club level, and so was trying to recreate what they had with the German national team. Mark called me, asked if I was interested in interviewing, got the role, and then I was off to Munich, Germany, and that was kind of the beginning of my soccer career.
Okay. Real quick before we dive into that soccer career, I got to ask you a professional development question based off what the story you just told, because I mean I've been in this position multiple times. I've never, Dustin, I've never actually discussed this with you, but I'm sure you have before as well. When you were going into that, you decided to take that T-Mobile cycling contract, and it was during all the the drug issues in cycling, and nobody, I'm guessing that not a lot of people wanted to touch that, wanted to go into that because of what was going on at the time. How did you professionally insulate yourself so that everyone knew, no, I'm not pumping these guys with EPO. I'm not pumping them with drugs. I'm not putting like androgynous testosterone in them. I'm not giving them any type of like performance enhancing drugs. Like, how did you professionally insulate yourself so you don't get blacklisted?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I was ignorance is bliss, in that regard, where I just, the guy that hired me, Lothar Heinrich at the time, was a team doc, and he said, "Hey, we're trying to get away from all this stuff, and we're trying to put in better performance methods that can give us these marginal gains that, so we don't have to rely on this stuff, because the way the sport was changing, it was all changing." And they were cracking down and getting more serious about it. And so from that point, I kind of just took it at face value, and I was like, yeah, like I'm into trying to improve something, and let's go do it. And so I didn't see or it was involved in any of that stuff. Like you knew it was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But I didn't see anybody sticking themselves. I didn't, so I was like, hey, I'm good. Like, I'm not implicated in any way. If there was a probe on anything, like I'm not touching anything. I'm not talking about it. Like if somebody's recording a conversation, like I wouldn't have anything to say about it. So, I just stuck to my kind of personal values around what I was doing, and it was fine.
All right. Okay. So you're in Munich. So the soccer career really starts to take off. Dustin and I, and like all American football fans, we got to watch the first game in Munich, Germany, when Tom Brady went in, and that crowd is ridiculous. And that crowd's, all the beer is gone in the stadium by halftime. Now, when you got there, how much of like a culture shift was it in terms of, oh wow, this is king here, as opposed to like we were coming from America, we we're like, oh, MLS, that's cool, like Columbus Crew, that's cool, like.
People have no idea. Like if you're American, you have no clue what the level of football or soccer is in the rest of the world, right? Like it's not just Europe, it's the rest of the world. Like that is the only, or not only, but the predominant sport. Like if you've traveled, it's soccer. That's it. Like, you have the other sports, but it's, the Olympic sports and some other things. But, basketball is now on the rise because all you need is a ball and a space.
Yeah.
It's like, it's an extremely cheap entry point in the rest of the world, not here in America, because here we have a pay to play system. But, that's why it's the world sport. That's why basketball, all you need is a bucket and a ball, and you can be on dirt court, you can be wherever, it doesn't matter to go shoot hoops, and same thing with the ball. So yeah, I had no clue. Like, also I'm from Canada, like northern Alberta, so like I didn't play soccer growing up.
Alberta.
I don't think at that point there was even youth soccer in the town where I grew up in Grand Prairie. So I was just like, yeah, all right, like soccer, that's cool, I'm into that, like, let's go check it out. Like I was completely naive, and then to the stardom that is there. So when you travel with Bayern Munich, like I had no idea who they were as a team, and what they meant to the rest of Europe and world soccer. and then they're one of the preeminent teams of the world. And so yeah, I was a deer in the headlights. So it was probably to a good thing, because I was just a guy working, doing my thing, and didn't know that like a Bastian Schweinsteiger is like a Tom Brady, so there was no starstruck or stardom. It was just a bunch of dudes that kick around a ball.
That would help. I would imagine if you didn't know who they were, that would 100% help, because right, Dustin, because you're not starstruck at all. Ignorance is bliss. Going back to that,
again, I had no preconceived notions, right, or no expectations. I was just like, hey, you want to get stronger, you want to get faster, this is what we got to do, you know.
So you went in there as the guy, or were you an assistant at that point?
Yeah, it was a kind of a team. So it was Oliver Schmidtlein was kind of the head guy with Jurgen, and then there was a couple of us hired to support from a performance rehab standpoint. So one of the kind of fitness rehab coaches is the role I took on there.
So I'm sorry, Dustin, go.
Can you remember at all in that interview, in that process, kind of what they were looking for, or did you feel like there was any nuance to what at that level, especially coming from where you're at with no background? Did you feel, I mean, was it a good interview, I guess, is part of it, but was there anything interesting about what they were looking for at that level?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a comprehensive, multidisciplinary approach, right? And that's what Exos, I think, one of the big things that they kind of pioneered in their time, or athletes' performance, right, was that. I think the other one is a structure, a systematization of performance, that you're kind of checking all the boxes. So the thoroughness of what it takes to improve somebody's performance, not just kind of weights in the weight room, but metabolically, physically, mentally, nutritionally. And so that was the big piece, I think, and having that broad range competency to be able to, I can do therapy on a guy, I can throw him on the table and do this, and then we can go out and we can train and we can lift and we can, so I think it just, when you have these kind of smaller teams or like smaller staffs, you got to be able to do everything, right? Like now with the national team, like I'm still one of the guys in the back mixing shakes, it's when you're in those team things, you got to do everything. It's not this glamour where you're, sitting at a desk, pointing at somebody, be like, all right, pick that up 3 times, do it fast,
Right.
I'll be over here if you need me.
I've never found that in my head to think that actually would be a luxury, because I would just feel like my sword's getting so dull. I've been in those moments where you kind of get removed from certain aspects of part of the job, and I the best analogy I have is growing up playing like Ironman football, where you play offense and defense and special teams. And then when I went to college, where you only play one side of the ball, I was like, I don't even know what this sport is. Same thing kind of applied in my career. If I wasn't having my hands, or at least a touch point in everything that I felt that I felt like I was losing my edge, and I don't like that. So yeah, even down to the nitty gritty. I mean, cleaning a weight room, even when I didn't have to do that, there's this thing in the back of my head where I was like, I wasn't certain that it was clean. Like, hey, I want help. I want people helping me do it, but I don't want to remove myself from situations. I don't know what that is wiring wise. It just never felt totally comfortable doing that. So no, I think that's actually a good thing, and it keeps you humble.
Yeah, no, 100%. We would be chatting at the back and be like, God, I'm glad I went to school for all these years to pour contents in a bottle and shake it and move on to the next one.
Are you a liter man, or are you a gram man when you mix and pour?
I'm Canadian. I'm a metric guy.
Beautiful.
And
it's more precise.
I'm yeah, and it's tough because when I in Canada, when I was in grade school, it was when they made the switch from standard to metric.
Oh, you poor
so
dude.
There's certain things that like I'm ingrained now, living, because I've lived half my life here in the US, so like miles and distance, I'm like, okay, but as soon as I get to a soccer pitch, or I'm talking about conditioning, I'm in meters and meters per second.
And
then speed, if I'm in a car, I'm miles per hour, but again, if I'm running, I'm all in a metric system because it's much easier to scale.
Yeah.
Temperature wise, Celsius makes way more sense. Just zero. That's the flat. That's the
Right.
starting point. Anything below is freaking cold. Anything above is hot.
Right. So you get over to Germany. One of the guys, you realize, oh, this is a big effing deal. And now when you get over there, I'm going to make an assumption. Did they all think you were American?
Yeah,
I mean,
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, accent wise, you don't have a strong Canadian accent at all. It's pretty much, so when you get there, how did you develop? Because obviously, international team, they know they're not going to get any slouches in there when the upper ups hire them in. So you have that respect from the start. How did you develop buy-in with these players, the international players, this incredible melting pot of just athletic bastion of human beings? How did you develop that buy-in from them to your methods, to the way you communicated?
That's so I mean, I didn't know a lick of German. So that, the kind of Winkelmann's coach like a caveman, or I think that came from Winkelmann. So that was good, right? Like, what German words? Up, down, here, there, like
yeah.
And so, and then, one thing was around communication. You can communicate in a lot of different ways. Like, obviously I didn't know German, so that was hard, right? So I was like, any German word I was gravitating to and saying, whether it was right, wrong, context. And so from just a trying perspective, they're like, okay, this guy's giving it a go. He sounds like a meathead most of the time, or I'd make stupid comments, sometimes on purpose, just to get a laugh or a rise out of them, and which they would think I would mess up so they could make fun of me. And, everyone is, the mood and the spirit stays high. And then it's just, trying to be in a good mood. So that was another thing I could do, like, every day, just trying to bring energy, motivation, kind of being the high five and white guy, without overdoing it. And, and then just attention to detail of helping them, trying to understand what it is they wanted to do and what they needed to do. And then, trying to do it in the best way every time. So even if they didn't like what I was putting down, they're like, man, this guy's, hopefully what they were thinking was, this guy is coming prepared. He's diligent. He's consistent. So they know what they get with me. And there was conversations, right? Like, one player, I was like, okay, we're going to lift. And, back then lifting was not a big piece of the culture. Like, it's a technical sport, and so you spend the majority of the time with the ball because you're playing with your feet, and you have to continue to develop that and maintain that feel. And no soccer player joins soccer going, dude, I can't wait to lift, this is gonna be awesome.
Right.
And so one of the guys, I was like, okay, we're gonna lift, and he's like, Darce, I'm one of the best players in the world, and I've never lifted a weight in my life. Like, why should I start now? And it was like, he punched me in the nose, and I was like, whew, that's a freaking great question. Like, yeah, you are one of the best players in the world, and, you haven't lifted a weight. So why should you? And so it made me kind of go back and rethink my whole philosophy. And, it made me think that if you ask a player, you ask a coach, what do you want to see in a player? And as a player, what do you want to be able to do? And it's repeated explosive actions, right? And so I'm like, okay, that's essentially power in academic terms. And power is work divided by time. And so, we focus as kind of the weight room fitness, is we focus on the work part, the picking up and putting down weights. But then there's this time component, right, that nobody really pays attention to in the work. And it's now with VBT and that kind of stuff, we're paying attention to it a lot more. But at the time, it wasn't really a thing. And so I was like, time is efficiency. And that's really a big part of their sport. Why they practice the skills so much is so they're more efficient. The more efficient they are, the more powerful they become. And so, it was more about like, okay, do you want to move better? Do you want to feel better? Do you want to, be able to do the skills easier. And he's like, yeah, I'm into that. I'm like, okay, let's start there. So let's work on your mobility. Let's work on your stability. Let's work on some movement patterning and coordination. And then once you're good at all that, he's like, all right, what's next? And it's, okay, now you got to add some resistance. Like,
Yeah.
that's, and so it really kind of flipped it over on its head for me at the time through that. And so, and it made me realize, for the hardcore lifters that were like, oh, that movement shit's, it's bullshit, or, that's, for wussies. And I'm like, no, now like there's a justification, a real rationale as to why we're doing this stuff in the grand scheme of performance training.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta be able to justify everything you do.
Yeah.
That's learn that from day one. That's so philosophy wise. So the 3 World Cups you've been a part of, with the first one was Germany.
Yeah, 2 with Germany, 2014, 2018. Opposite spectrums of the results, and then just recently with U.S. Soccer in 22.
Okay. So give us an overview of how your philosophy over those World Cups has I won't say changed, but has evolved to a more fine-tuned version to what it is now.
Yeah, I don't know if much has changed. I think, where it started, I think what the philosophy, and I've said this in other places, and so apologize if it sounds redundant, but after the World Cup, right? Like I just happened to get on the right bus and be a part of a team that won the World Cup. And so afterwards, people, you win a big trophy, and people are like, oh, what was it that, what did you guys do? What was the good, what was the thing that you think was the winning ingredients? And so we were talking about the Germans. They're very well planned, very well drilled. Every detail is taken care of. Like supply chain is their country, right? They got the best cars, the best roads. The airline industry, they pioneered a lot around supply chain stuff. And I didn't know what that term meant, but this buddy of mine who worked in business, he's like, wow, it sounds like you guys supply chain managed human performance. And I was like, okay, I never heard that term before. What does that mean? So I went back and looked up supply chain management, and it was really these kind of 4 categories that gets put to work in building products in business. It's around planning, sourcing your materials. In the sporting world, it's people mainly. There's returns. So when something breaks, it gets returned, they fix it, and they put it back in the sales chain. So that's, rehab or return to play. There's logistics, which kind of goes with planning. And then sourcing, then there's sales, which in our world is winning, right? I feel like I'm missing. Oh, and then there's just the work, like the actually producing the product, right? And so that's training. And so there was this supply chain managing. And then, one kind of key book I read early on was by a guy, Atul Gawande, called The Checklist Manifesto. And he talked about, he was a doctor that was hired by the World Health Organization, I do believe, to reduce the number of deaths in third world countries, in hospitals. And so he was looking at all these different industries to see, like the airline industry, the nuclear power industry, they're inherently very dangerous, right? Like we're not made to fly, but we fly. And it's, they say it's safer than driving your car. And then nuclear power, like if there is one thing that goes wrong, it's catastrophic. And so, what were the key pieces that made those industries safe? And he applied that. And one was just checklists. And it was just having checklist upon checklist so that you could go through your checklist. You can decide, hey, I'm not going to do this, but it's a conscious decision. And, you go through it. So you make sure you hit all your steps. And so those were the 2 pieces, right? Like systems and checklists that make sure that you don't go through. And as a physio, that was one thing I learned when I started skipping steps or assuming that somebody was good in a certain place. Then that's when I also realized, like, that's when they got re-injured or something bad happened or things didn't go the way I wanted it to go. So from kind of reading that book and these experiences kind of culminated into, I'm going to do, like, if I'm rehabbing somebody, they're going to go through every exercise, even if it's one rep, just to show that they can do it and they're competent at it. And I'm like, okay, then let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next. And then once we get to whatever that threshold is, then, that's where we're going to kind of hang out and mix and match a little bit.
Okay.
Are you applying that kind of thought process on a macro level now too, from like a team standpoint? I feel like I've heard you mention this maybe in a previous podcast or something, but I know it resonated with me because this is something that I don't want to say ignorantly neglected. I just, in certain settings at the beginning of my career, I didn't feel it necessary to preseason sit down with the staff, the team, and hash out, like, do we actually share a unified vision on where we're going with what's going on? And I've recently had a couple of strength conditioning friends this happens to everyone. I'm curious if your experience with this maybe as well. But it never fails that if something derails, unmature coaches like to point fingers at strength conditioning staffs. And if you kind of set things up, maybe using that, I think the real question I'm getting at is to alleviate and maybe eliminate this. I haven't heard anyone really talk about it, but it never fails that there's always finger pointing, and a lot of it gets directed in our direction. What have you put in play, not necessarily to alleviate that, but I think the system kind of that you're laying out, or maybe other things that you've had to address, can prevent that from happening, that I think coaches should be utilizing up front, regardless of what level they're at, to establish this kind of whatever you've kind of seen throughout your career, a unified vision, goal setting from a larger scale to a smaller scale. Do we look at it from a season standpoint or, multi-year standpoint? I guess, what have you come to find value in on a little bit bigger scale with setting things up on, before day one, really?
Yeah, a huge question. Great question. And a lot is ripping through my brain when you say that.
break it apart into smaller, digestible chunks for sure.
Yeah. So I think bottom line is having a clear mission, vision, value. That is, and so the group, your performance group, however you want to define it, right? Like, to me, medical is performance, right? Like, that's part of the performance group. It doesn't sit on the other side. But if for logistics, and it comes to also how important communication is, and the words we use, the words we choose, how we define terms also defines our way of thinking, right? So there's a few things that we kind of got to get out on the table that everybody understands. And as soon as we say, another book popped into my head, it was really good, something around sapiens. But just like, if you have medical and you have strength, right? Like, you're already drawing a line in between those two. And as soon as you draw a line, you're creating two groups that have opinions about other groups. But if you take that line away, now we're all in the same group, and it's no different in football, right? Like you said, it, offense, defense. So if you have good team unity, they're all supporting each other. But when shit goes bad, the offense is like, oh, fuck, defense isn't scoring goals. Oh, defense isn't, backing it up. Like,
and very relevant in soccer.
Yeah.
And you have to shift over sometimes.
Exactly. Well, and that's the cool thing about soccer, is that each player is a quarterback. Each player is a receiver. Each player is a defender, like a linebacker, loosely speaking.
Sure.
And each player is an offensive lineman, loosely speaking, and a goalie, right? Like, so you're playing all these roles at the same time. So the situational awareness is critical for these guys, right? Always. And I think that's where soccer is a great analogy to the complexity of how teams work. It's a chess match, because, like, if I move over here, if this guy moves over here, this guy needs to know that, because in a certain situation, maybe he can pass him a long ball. But if he doesn't know he's over there, right? Basketball is a smaller version of soccer. It's 5 guys on a smaller space, but the concept is the same. Like, it's opening space, creating space to move into space to get a shot opportunity. And, and football is a little the same, right? Like, how am I moving people around to get an open space, but it's just more timing and calculated and in individual moments, where in basketball and in soccer and hockey, it's this concert that's constantly moving, that you always have to be aware of. And so so realizing that it's a complex system, and then kind of back to the mission, vision, values, no different than a coach, right? A coach has to have a philosophy, a way of playing, and a strategy on how they're going to go execute it out onto the group. And then they got to get buy-in, right? Like, I can either tell you this is what we're doing, or I can say, hey, Dustin, how do you think we should handle this? And so for me, getting the group together and saying, hey guys, what's our purpose? What's our vision? What's our mission here as a group? How do we want to work? Like, what's our value proposition? Because the other thing is, that's when teams work and don't work, is when your personal values don't align with what's happening in your day-to-day, right? So, and it's not a like, I'm right, you're wrong. It's just it's an what it is. Yep. So if I'm a new person coming into a team and I say, hey, this is the value system, or this is the group's value system, and this happened in my time at Roma, they have to decide, do my values align with that? And if they don't, it's probably not a great place for you. And Absolutely. It's not that you're not going to be a contributor here. Right. It's just that you're not going to be happy here because the values don't align. And so that becomes the level setter to everything. And then that becomes, those values become the filters that you make the decisions every day. And before Rome, I thought the whole mission, vision, values thing was the cliche. It's in all these business books, and but once I was the head of performance and I had to take a group in Italy this time, where I didn't know Italian, and trying to do this, like, it was really hard. And I started to go down a path. Then I was like, oh shit, I need to like circle the wagons here. Otherwise I'm like walking the plank off the deep end, like I'm going to be out there, and it's just a matter of time before they push me off. And so once I got everybody, once we got everybody participating, then it became a shared vision, shared values. Everybody was in the same page. Everybody's policing the same things, keeping me honest, right, to those things. Like, hey, Darce, we're not, true to our value here in the decision we're making. Absolutely right. Appreciate you bringing it to my attention. Now let's do it. And then, so that was that part that got us in the way of working. And then it was, everyone could participate in what those checklists were. And if somebody felt like, hey, I really think this needs to be in here, great, let's put it in. Like, because it can't hurt, to do one extra little thing can't hurt. And then as we went through the system, and I remember 2 years into it, the team doc, he's like, Darce, this thing is like, this is so easy. Like, I know what this guy's doing every day. Like, he's going to do this, then he's going to go to here, and then he's going to do that. And if that's good, we're going to move him to this. And I think he's going to be ready to join the team in, 3 days. And he feels comfortable going to the coach and saying that, because of all these steps and seeing it happen time and time again. And, and it's not that like it was a perfect world and we were amazing and we didn't do anything wrong, but it gave us a standard that we could then review, like we plan, we do, then we review to say, okay, how do we make it better? So if a situation didn't turn out the way we wanted to, for whatever reason, say a guy got re-injured, okay, let's go through, what did we miss? What do we have to put in place to make the system better? And it sounds super tedious, and it is to a degree, but from a consistency and a trust, I think, standpoint from the player side, because I was listening to one of your other podcasts with Zach on there, and he was talking about working with players that have other medical teams outside of the team. How do you work with them? And with the men's national team, that's a big part of what we have to do, right? Because we're playing with house money, we're, all the stuff that we have is on loan to us to then go do this. And so it's the same thing, is if you have really robust, strong systems, then people trust, right? Like, hey, I'm going to get on this flight and I trust it's going to go from A to B, and we're not going to land in the middle of the ocean or hit a mountain or whatever. It happens, unfortunately, but they go back and they review why did it happen, and they put things in place and things move forward. So there's a lot there, and a lot there. Another good book, just another good book that really squared it up for me was The Fifth Discipline, because it talked about complexity and how to get your arms around that from a management perspective.
Right, because I think that's one of those things that if we can go this question later, but there's kind of these intangible things that you can be a strength coach and never have these ideas or concept presented to you prior to it being like, oh man, this is something we need to now consider. I'm sure that was probably your experience at some point where it's like, I didn't need to really be too concerned. I was very confident that you give me this group of athletes and I know we're going to get better. We might have different starting points, but when it gets to a level where, hey, we need to, like, we maybe have grand goals, or like the goal is just much longer and much bigger, where it's like, no, we really have to take these things into consideration. But I don't think that even from an elementary school level to wherever the highest level, some version of that should be in play if you want to kind of go in the best direction, not have loose ends.
And it's tough, like kind of to earlier on in your question, you start kind of unfortunately in a team scenario with your least common denominator, right? Like to some degree, because like if I start too high, there's going to be some people that fall off, right? Like you're going to lose some people, and on the professional ranks and the money involved, like it can't happen, right? And so how do I start, with our lowest common denominator, but then be able to scale, kind of like the equalizer board to an individualization perspective to say like, okay, this guy's up here. How do we keep him up here without dropping to this level and him not getting any better, right? And so that's where the progression, regression, lateralization stuff comes in, and then how strong are your systems to be able to do that, where you could walk in and you got 26 guys lifting in the gym and everybody is on the same path, right? Like we're all moving forward, we're all going that way. Some guy, one guy's doing it over here, one guy's doing it up here, one guy's a little back here, but we're all going this way.
Sure.
So and it's not easy, and by no means do I have it solved by any stretch, because you're always constrained by logistics, time, education, awareness, and so that's what kind of makes it fun and exciting is the problem solving, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the chess match in it.
Yeah.
Have you ever, another professional development question, have you ever run into any issue with what you mentioned that Coach Witherspoon was talking about, where he's having to deal with outside strength and conditioning professionals, like one-on-one workers with, several other players? Have you ever had to communicate with them, like say they're having the players do something that's just very bad, like doing a snatch on top of a physio ball for reps, something where you're like, something bad's going, not like that, thank God, something bad's going to happen. How do I tell this guy don't do that without coming across, as an authoritarian or, a prick?
I think first off, nobody like goes out, or very few people go out being like, man, I can't wait to screw this guy up. Like, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to make him do snatches on a physio ball, and then he's going to fall and break his neck or blow his knee, And funny enough, I don't know, I might be dating myself because I'm probably a little older than you fellas. But there was a pitcher, this was back in early 2000s, Outside Magazine. I think it was Outside Magazine, of Mark Verstegen doing a squat on a physio ball. And
I remember that magazine.
And so so it's funny your question. So I don't know if that's where it's coming from, but
it came from West Virginia. West Virginia University used to have their players do dumbbell cleans and snatches on top of physio balls. That lasted for a season.
Yeah, exactly. And you see a lot of crazy stuff, right? Like, and part of it, I might show some ignorance or wisdom. I don't know which one, but like you see a lot of people doing balancing stuff on Bosu balls and bicep curls on Bosu balls. I'm like, is that really the best bang for our buck? Like, I feel like there's so many other places we could spend our time and energy. And and but maybe there's something I don't know about, biceps and Bosu balls, and I got to go figure it out or learn a little more. So it always starts with asking why and trying to understand where they're coming from, because like I'm going off the assumption, or my starting point, that nobody wants to hurt anybody,
Right.
and so then it's like, okay, tell me why you're doing this, what got you to that point, like what was your progression to get there, what, because maybe that's, I don't know, your Bosu snatch example is a little different than my Bosu, or physio ball snatch example is a little different than my Bosu bicep example, but maybe they're freaking unbelievable, and there's some Cirque du Soleil, wizard that that's their next progression. I don't know, but I think it's first going with the humility of trying to understand first, and understand like what the athlete's trying to accomplish, what the trainer's trying to accomplish, and really getting a sense of that, figuring out what the why is, and then then being like, okay, do you mind if I make some suggestions? Like, we're going here, and similar to what Zach said is the same thing. Like, as a team, the boat is going this way, right? Like, we can't change that. And so is what you're doing preparing this player to go that way? And if it's contributing a little bit, great. If it's a lot, even better. If not at all, then let's take what you're doing and see how we can get them from A to B.
Right. So going off that A to B, what does a week look like for you? So coming from that hybrid side of strength and conditioning and medical, where you cross both aisles, what does a week of training look like that you write out and you execute out for this level of human being, quote off season, however you want to define that, to okay, we're ramping up for the World Cup, we're a couple months out. What do the weeks look like? What are the primary differences?
Ooh, wow, that's a big question. Because the other piece is like, am I in the national team, or am I a club team? Like, because those are two different beasts, right?
Well, you have different resources at that point too. Like, I'm sure you're tracking a lot more, biometrics potentially, maybe in one group versus the other. So you have the ability at that point to make daily or weekly adjustments to someone's load and training and mileage, because for sure.
So so it started out like, I'll go as U.S. national team, and you'll see, hopefully, I mean, it, but it'll maybe help explain the complexity of the situation. So you got we're taking in 26 guys coming from teams all around the world, domestically, internationally, that all have their own, they're all playing soccer, but they all have their own philosophy and style of soccer, right? Do they want to play high energy, high pressing type soccer, or are they more of a low block, park the bus, wait and react, a transition team? And so you can have anything and everything in between. Then you have the respective positions in those systems, right? Like, so if you have your wing backs, your outside guys, like they're basically like interval runners, right? Like, they're just going up and down, up and down. Your midfielder is a start stop guy, but he's constantly moving, but he never reaches top speed. You have your central defenders that are, it's a loose analogy, but they're kind of like outfield players in baseball. They're kind of hanging around, and depending if you're playing well or not, they're doing nothing, and then all of a sudden they got to go at a maximal effort to defend. And then you got your kind of forward guys that are kind of hanging out, sniping in the grass, and then we got to go, and to get a shot off. And so you have the different positions in the different systems and formations that different teams play around the world. And so one of the things that we did was we said, hey, look, how can we first help? Because it's inevitable, the players are going to come to us, and then they're going to go back to their teams. So how can we first be helpful to the teams that these teams own these players, right? Like, they're just loaning to us. And so, we're going to keep track of everything we can. We're going to keep it nice and tidy. And then as soon as the camp is done, we're going to give them all the information. And then we even took it a step further, and we said, hey, now you have all this information in real time. So every day you can go onto your portal and you can see exactly what your player's done. You can see all his wellness screens, you can see his questionnaires, you can see his RPE, you can see how much he ran, you can see exactly what we did in practice, what we lifted, what their corrective stuff was. So so we set up a system that they could do that to help build trust, so that then they could see like, wow, these guys are, hopefully they're thinking they're really taking care of these guys and they're doing everything that we would hope they would do. And so that helped build the trust that then we ask like, hey, if you give us all the information that you have on these players, and you know, like kind of going back 4 weeks prior to them coming into camp, we can take that information, we can review it, and that'll help us do a better job managing your players in what they're going to be expected to do when they're with us. And at the same time, you will have all that data when they're with us. And then, you know, so when they come back to you, you can keep them going. And so then you see what they're doing, what we know we need to do. We have this drill builder that we have all our drills and we can put in times, and we're probably within about 5% accuracy of how much somebody's going to run, sprint, stop, start, all those things. And so then we're like, okay, how far are these two things apart, right? Like what they've been doing and what we need them to do. And then that is where, you know, the jerry rigging of like, okay, can we get away with this and do this? Hey, you know what? Based on the minutes this guy's played, the intensity that he's worked in his club, due to the circumstances that we can't control and we have no opinions about, right? Because it's
right,
you can't do it. Then, you know, the best thing for this guy is to do XYZ and play 20 minutes in this game. And then, you know, then it's like, okay, this would be the ideal, but if strategically the game is going a certain way and the opportunity comes that he doesn't get his 20 minutes that you were hoping to fill his tank, then you have to have a backup plan after the game to get him that, to keep moving him to the next step. So it's just this constant playing around of all these variables and, you know, kind of like educated guessing of, you know, how we can get them there in a safe way.
Do you ever, I mean, have you ever thought to yourself, like, if I had, and this is typically like the roundup question that I ask at the very end, but I got to ask it now after that. You had a national player and you're working with them, let's say, let's be nice. You've worked with them for a year, straight up, in person, whole team, complete hypothetical situation. You had that one team, all right, we have one day in the weight room. What does it look like? Dustin, I'm sorry, I always ask this question. I know you're bored of it, but I have to know. I have to know.
No, I have a follow-up question to build off of this time. Normally I wouldn't ask this, but Darce has a very he's been in some scenarios that I think, and with his experience specifically with his background, I'm intrigued for his response. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm taking one day in a weight room, you know, and that's like, so there's always context, right? So I'm always looking for context.
Gotta have it,
because that's going to help me make the better decision. So assuming that, you know, we're not talking about, you know, movement skill stuff and putting that in there, plyos, maybe I'm doing that separate versus integrating it into the lift for some complex, you know, complex training, that kind of thing. You know, it's a total body lift, like pushes, pulls. I'm integrating, you know, I'm a bang for the buck trying to fit in like density. And so, you know, like I'm going to do a lift, I'm probably going to do some kind of supplementary mobility while we're resting from that lift. And, you know, to try and make your time as efficient as possible. And then, you know, the volume, how many lifts we're going to do or what kind of volume depends on where we're at in the circumstance, right? Like, are we trying to build muscle? Are we trying to just do strength? You know, I tend in soccer in season, it's like our guys don't need to be bigger, muscularly bigger, right? Like it's not a heavy contact sport unless it's maybe a central defender or whatever. But these guys run so much that they have a hard time holding weight, you know. Like if you're eating well and you're training, like you're going to get ripped because they're just putting in, you know, they're putting in 40 kilometers a week of
Right.
of intensity, you know. Anywhere from 25 to 40, it's a range. But so yeah, that would be a general lift. I know that's probably yeah, it's a pretty loose loose answer. I don't know if you wanted more detail, but you know, I tend to stick to like single leg stuff for a variety of reasons. One is because you see one side compared to the other, so you can't cheat a single limb lift, right? Like you see the symmetries. The you know, there's stability limiting. I call it stability limiting lifts. You're only going to be able to pick up what you can stabilize against. So if we're going to maximize strength, you know, that is one way to do it. Because you're getting that stability and rotational stability with the actual moving the weight, like the pure strength piece, like we'll throw that in there as well to move the needle and try and, you know, up the level. So it just depends on, am I worried about them having muscular soreness? Am I not? You know, because a lot of these guys, you know, they see soreness as a disease or a sickness, and they, you know, if they have it, they can't train. And so at the end of the day, it's about having guys on the field to train. So we got to manage the DOMs on certain things as well. So and then yeah, it's like quality, explosive, fast, you know, good, clean moving.
Yeah, do you guys have I'm guessing you have all the toys when it comes to that level, but do you have perch mounts?
No, so we so that's where, again, a national team. If I was in a club, I'd love to be doing VBT. Like I'm super hype right now on 1080 stuff and you know, acceleration, and even more so deceleration profiling. Like to me, that is the future. You know, which then goes along with the VBT stuff. It's just that the 1080 stuff is more translatable to the field from a player coach perspective of how this is going to impact their ability on the field. But now you have those numbers, which then translate to your VBT numbers in the gym, right? Like, so now you have this common red thread. To go back to the question, like, Darce, I'm the best player in the world and I've never lifted, you know, like, why should I start now? Because this is connected to this, and it's a very clean, commonsensical connection. You know, I don't have to, there's not a huge bridge to jump to get them from A to B. It's very, you know, very step by step, in my opinion. So I'm like very big on that. Just with the national team, you know, we're in hotel ballrooms, we're in other people's gyms, we're in you know, it's basically a gym in a bag. So you know, we traveled with a Beaver Fit box, a set of, you know, and they're heavy, a Beaver Fit box, a bench, set of power blocks, or a couple sets depending on where we were, you know, and then you got physio balls that you can blow up, water bags that you know, you just need a tap, you know, just things like that, jump stretch bands and those kind of things. And you gotta get it done. And then the other thing is, everybody's on a different plan and you're only seeing them for a short window. So you know, the first thing is do no harm. And so yeah, there's a lot to contend with there.
Yeah. Dustin, what do you got? What was your follow-up to that?
So I'll provide the parameters to make it a little easier for this one. And I'm a little bit curious if it'd be the same, because you kind of mentioned having the you know, elite best player in the world that hasn't touched a weight in his career. Would that guy get the same like GPP? I'm curious just on GPP, in your opinion, what you like in regards to that. Is it the same for a 20-year-old non-athlete gen pop as it would be for that person that's never touched a weight? And what do you favor in regards to GPP? Where do you start someone? How long would you kind of keep them there?
Yeah. I think so from a GPP, it's basic movements, right? Like, can you do basic movements fundamentally well? And then, you know, can you squat? Can you lunge? Can you jump? You know, like basic things. And then depending on what your quality is, that, you know, to the same concept of the guy, like his movement was great. All right. Now we got to lift it. Like, now we got to load it, or we got to regress it because you can't lunge. So we're just going to do some iso holds in a lunging pattern until you build up some basic strength, to then move through a range of motion in a good way without, shit banging into each other kind of thing. So that's probably the simplest way. So,
favoring
basic
body weight type stuff for body weight movement, making sure it's sound prior to loading it all.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's always the trade-off, right? Like you're going to get people that have been loading like crazy, but they're a train wreck, and they come in and in their mind, they're like, hey, I want to keep loading because I feel like that's helped me, but I move, they don't say this, I think it, like you're a train wreck.
Right.
We need to do this. So then it's like, how do you kind of have their cake and eat it too? And so that's the creative part of like, okay, I pick also a lot of lifts that they can't screw up too bad.
Sure.
Right. Like, so you try and find lifts or movements where when you put them in a position, you can either do the movement or you can't. And it's very obvious to them. Is like, why can't I do this? It's because you got XYZ. Like, here would be the next step down. Oh, okay. Like, now you can do it in you're kind of in a nice way putting training wheels on them, and then once they get better at it, they come back and they're like, oh, I can do this now. So yeah, it's kind of which I'm interested, Joe, we could do it off record sometime, but another area that I'm secretly think about is CrossFit. Like, to me, it's a really interesting genre, I guess, from that regard, just because of what's possible, what they've shown is possible that we didn't think was possible, with the high level athletes. And I think there's a ton to learn there, because of, at the end of the day, it's all the same human body, generally speaking.
No, I mean, you want to do the off base sometimes on a Zoom call or a phone call, let me know. We can 100% do that. That's so we know you got to be out here in 8 minutes. Dustin, do you have a final question? And I'll ask him a final question, and we can get this man off to crushing it like he has been for decades.
Sure. I guess
and appreciate the conversation. I wish we could keep it rolling.
Yeah. I guess best advice you've ever received. It doesn't have to be coaching specific either. Best advice you've received or you could give to the listeners, I guess.
Wow, that's a tough one. I'm terrible at kind of quoting people. From a mentor perspective, probably more observational. Probably one of my biggest mentors is Mark Verstegen. Like, every time I'm trying to read books to get smarter, and every time I read a book, I'm like, God, Mark's been doing that for years. And you learn something new, and then you read another book and you're like, God, he's been doing that for years. Like, how did he know this? So I think it's just, and it's like anything, partly why I live in the mountains is, I'm not always the most motivated guy when it comes to exercise and fitness, but if I'm around a bunch of motivated outdoor fitness people, then at the end of the day, like, I'm just guilty by association. So you try and, I guess, hang with people that are better than you and try and glean as much as you can from it, based on what you're able to take in that moment. Because the other thing is, like, I would love to go back in time knowing, we all say this, knowing what I know now, to do so many other things, because you would get so much more out of it. Impact would be so much more.
That's a tough one to think about sometimes.
You don't. That's the trick to it. You don't think about it.
I get caught up sometimes. I'm sitting there for 4 hours holding a baby. I'm like, gosh, if I only knew what I knew now, just because I feel like I didn't even know the right questions to ask sometimes. Like, I just spoiled environments. I approach things so much different now, because it's good, you reflect on it, and I now know, like, when I get in this situation again, I'm not missing this and this. Like, those are the first things that I'm gonna put my efforts and my energy into. And it's also just, it really enlightened me to pursuing passions. If you're passionate about something, regardless of what it is, if it hits you and it's like, man, I feel some passion regarding that, like, go with it, go for that, as opposed to, I just didn't know how to discern, like, where to direct your energy sometimes and put your efforts. So that's really good. If you're not thinking about that now, I think it's excellent advice.
Yeah, probably one thing that I've heard over and over, it seems to be sinking in more and more, is probably like, do hard things and don't worry about the consequences. You know, like and because that's where you learn, you know, and we have this kind of motto with the national team: behind every mountain is another mountain. Like it's
I
never
love
going to
that.
stop, right? Like you're always going to have the next thing. And I think, you know, I had the opportunity to work with some military folks, and it's obviously a huge part of their culture,
Sure.
because they don't know when they're going to get the next hard thing. They just know that it's coming, you know, at some point. And I think that's the thing. And you know, leaning into those hard things, where before I would probably, you know, like, oh God, I don't want to suffer, you know, I'm not into suffering. And now I'm like, you know what, let's go, I'll suffer. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like,
Right.
I could possibly die, maybe, depending on what it was, but you know, if that's my time, that's my time. So
Well, that's why Garmin invented the spot reach, the in reach. You can always call for an evacuation team now, so you're good.
It's
Just
fine.
no fear.
yeah, exactly. So I would say that's probably some of the best advice that I've gotten over and over. And to your point of, you're only ready to learn when you're ready to learn it.
Yeah.
I feel like at this point, you know, with kids and moving countries and doing all these things, that's probably some of the best advice that I could pass on is just go do hard things, and because you're going to learn the most from it. You know, Rome was probably one of the toughest work experiences I ever had. And there was days where if someone threw me a life preserver, I'd be like, I'm out, I'm taking it, you know?
Yeah.
And it just happened to coincide with reading the book, The Obstacle is the Way. And and I was like, all right, I just need to suck this up. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
I get fired and I go home. Like,
Right.
you know,
Right.
I can keep working. I can do stuff. Like, it's okay.
And then my last question, you've actually already you brushed on it. If you knew then what you knew now, 20 years ago, what would you do different that'd make you a better coach? Dustin's already touched on the better human being part. I whatever. I want to know the juice on being a better coach. So 20 years ago, knowing now, or you know, knowing then what you know now, what is it? What's the one thing?
Oh man.
There's so many things.
There is, I mean, yeah, and it's probably a little cliche, like just trying to absorb more information, you know, like try and be available to do more with more people, you know, and because you can always learn something by walking in a door, looking into a room, watching some stuff happening. You know, I'm extremely grateful for the track that I did do, you know, because I'll get people asking like, hey, I want to do what you do, how did you get there? And you know, even just the way the industry is set up today, I don't know if I were to set out as a me 20 years ago, if I could get where I'm at today.
Right.
That yours isn't the common route now.
Yeah.
You don't hear
but I
that.
think you see a lot of people that are athletic trainers, PT, strength coaches, right? Like it's way more common than it used to be.
Yes.
And so I just was like, hey, that's interesting. I'm going to go learn that, you know, or try that. And, you know, and we're all making decisions based on our constraints. So like, can you make money at it? Can I pay my bills doing it? Like there's certain things that, you know, certain base level things that you have to be able to take care of that influence your decision to go do things. And, you know, whether it's kids, whether it's significant others, whether it's money, whether it's whatever, there's always limitations. And so I guess it's a little philosophical, but hopefully it's answering it in a good way. And it was a podcast that I listened to by Michael Gervais. And he was interviewing and I always get this guy's name wrong, the school chaplain of USC, who I think, if memory serves me right, is Buddhist and you know, at USC, which is supposedly the most religions represented in one school, which was 92. I had no idea there was that many religions. So he said, take as much informed risk as possible while you're young. Like, because Michael said, hey, what do you tell these students, these kids, these people that you work with? And it's take as much informed risk. So like, risk the hell out of it. Go places, do things, do hard things, and don't look back, because all those create who you become down the road, right? Like those are all reflective experiences that kind of set the standard of how you continue to make future judgments and decisions. So yeah, hopefully that satisfies your answer there.
No, that's tremendous, because I can, just you saying that, thinking about, I can very, very well picture the people that haven't done that, like have done the opposite, done everything out of fear-based, and they were just even afraid to do the research, to jump in the ocean. It's like a whole bunch of times of like, there's this thing called swimming. You can go out there and you can survive in the water if you know how to do it. But the inability to even want to figure that out, or test those waters in some shallow water and then go do it.
Yeah.
I think the people that I see struggle the most in general are the ones that are afraid to even figure it out to then test it. So I think that's something I haven't thought about or tried to put it into terms like that. But no, I think that's absolutely
a classic example. A classic example was, I had a guy say, "Hey, Darce, like, I want to do what you're doing. Can you, I think I can do it. Can you help me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm into helping people. Like, absolutely." And so I was, he's like, "What do you want to do work wise, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Okay, let me," and he was a good practitioner, good guy. Like, I had faith referring him. And I said, "Hey, I think I can get you a deal in LA working at one of the Exos facilities. And then, from there you can get your party started," right? Like, cause you're meeting tons of people, you're working with tons of different athletes, high level practitioners, great systems and structures. Like, that'll set the tone. I mean, and going off that set the tone for me, the foundation. And he's like, "Yeah, I don't want to live in LA." I was like, "All right, then, like, then you're not going to do what I'm doing." At least not that way. Like, so you got to be willing to give a little bit, and there's a balance, right? Like, can you afford to live there based on what they might pay you, and those constraints, and you just got to be good with what those limitations are and the decisions you make off them. So down the road, you're not like, "Oh, I could have done that." Like, well, you didn't.
All right, Coach. Well, we know you have another meeting to get to. Thank you so much for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to join us and just shed all your light and all your wisdom and your decades of experience with everybody. Love to have you on again down the road. If anyone wants to reach out to you and ask you questions off record, where can they reach you?
Gosh, so I have a few different jobs, right? Piecing it all together like people do. So D Norman at ussoccer.org, Darcy at Kitman Labs. That's my kind of day job around data analytics and helping teams do better things with data. I'm on Twitter. I'm, due to my age, I'm not, I haven't adopted Instagram to its fullest. So I have a channel there, but I don't check it that often. LinkedIn, you can find me there. So I like to think I reply to anything and everything that comes my way. Sometimes it takes longer. So if I don't get back to you, it's not a personal thing. It's just, I might be time constrained at that point. So.
Gotcha. We'll put all those links down below. We'll let you go. I'll shoot you text in a little bit. Again, thank you for taking time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. Great chatting. Love to chat further. I feel like there's a million topics.
Some
research on you guys. That I would love to chat with you about. Like, the CrossFit thing is an interesting thing for me, and personally and physiologically. And so that's some interesting stuff. I think there's some really cool stuff I'd love to talk about around rehab to running. And just, the benefit of walking in a rehab program and what you can do with that. So there's some really kind of cool topics, I think, that are new and exciting to the performance world.
All right.
We'll look forward to it.
All right. Well, sir, sounds good. I'm going to let you go. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Right. You too. Have a good one.